All right, welcome to the Two Sons podcast. Happy Thursday or Friday, whatever day it is that I decide to release this, everybody. I hope all of you guys are having a great week so far. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. We would sincerely appreciate that, and we really appreciate the support you guys have given us over the course of the last couple of months. I also have a link tree in the description of this video that will take you to all of our socials and feeds. If you guys could follow us there, we'd really appreciate it. So things are heating up rather intensely.
Yeah.
Really on all the shows that we're watching.
That's what I was thinking too.
This is essentially, if you know anything about the Dance of Dragons, which is the word that the people of Westeros, or the phrase that the people of Westeros use to describe the civil war that decimates the Targaryens and kills most of their dragons. This conflict starts shortly after Viserys' death, which is obviously pending almost immediately after this episode.
I think that he died at the end of the episode.
He either died or or is going to die very shortly.
The reason why I think he died is because the screen goes black and it's completely silent. There's no music being played. So we see that happen in like a lot of shows, like even in some Star Wars shows, like when something big happens,
they just go dead silent.
Yeah, it's just silent. Yeah, so I think that symbolized his death.
So I think that's a good place to start because there's a bunch of other stuff that we need to get to in this episode, but I think that's a good place to start. So there's two, and Carly didn't pick up on this the first time she watched, so I wonder if you picked up on it because I had to explain it to her. But Rhaenyra, if you remember, in the very first episode, I think it was either the first episode or the second episode, when she gets proclaimed the heir.
Yeah.
Viserys takes her down into the dragon, into like the dragon graveyard thing in front of Balerion the Dread's dragon skull.
Right.
And Balerion the Dread was the dragon that Aegon the Conqueror, with his two sisters, used to conquer Westeros.
Right.
And Aegon had a dream, and in this dream, he saw that he called the Song of Ice and Fire. He sees the White Walkers essentially, and is aware that the people of Westeros have to be united to fight against this threat. And he passes that down only to his heirs down the line, and he tells Rhaenyra. So Rhaenyra goes up to Viserys at the end, on his deathbed basically, and basically goes like, the Song of Ice and Fire, do you believe it?
Right.
And he ends up he can't communicate well enough because he's all doped up on Milk of the Poppy, so he can't say anything, so that scene basically ends, right?
Right.
Well, obviously a ton of other stuff happens in the episode, but at the end of the episode, Alicent goes into the room and gives him some Milk of the Poppy, so he's doped up, obviously. And Viserys, who it doesn't even like seem to be aware of what's really happening around him, starts talking as though Rhaenyra is still there.
That's what
it
is.
Says like
that's a good pickup, Jay.
And he goes like, the Song of Ice and Fire, it is true, and it's you. You have to be the one to lead us.
Yeah,
and
I know that created a mess.
Yes, it did, because as we saw in the preview, I don't know if you watched the preview for the next week's episode, but there's basically a scene where Alicent tells the Hand of the King, Otto, like, he told me that it's me. He told me that it's supposed that the throne should pass to Aegon. So that's basically where everything goes south.
Oh my gosh.
So basic miscommunication, although I don't think it, because even Alicent at the end where she kind of walks away and then like silently turns around and she goes like, I understand, husband.
Right.
And then she like turns, it was almost like kind of like I don't think she really believes what she's saying. She's just using that as the excuse.
I mean? And that's number one, really good acting on her part. For us to both feel that, even though nothing was said, because it had it exuded the vibe of that's good enough for me.
I'm going to take that as a complete call to action, actually. That statement you made on your deathbed while high,
That's pretty funny.
But yeah, so that was probably the call it the moment that triggers the Civil War. But I mean, it's really simple. The story of the Dance of the Dragons essentially goes that Viserys dies, and Alicent and the Hand basically proclaim Aegon and crown him. Yeah. And unfortunately, Rhaenyra and everybody's at Dragonstone, so they don't really have anything they can do other than invade King's Landing at that point, and that essentially is what starts the Civil War. So we're literally there, and we have 2 episodes left, 9 and 10, they're coming up. But yeah, like this is gonna get absolutely wild and off.
I'm
off
sure
the
it
rails.
is.
It's gonna be. I'm very, very, very excited. Not that this episode wasn't off the rails because we saw a man's head get cut in half.
Oh yeah, that was unexpected. I looked down for like a brief moment, and then I look up, and then I see a torso with a neck, and then a tongue. Just sticking out, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, that was totally Game of Thrones." You know, my brother was texting me, and he was like, "This is like Game of Thrones, like the essence of Game of Thrones." And I was like, "Okay, yeah,
it really
whatever."
was.
And then it's actually like pretty chill, you know. And then all of a sudden, there's a severed head.
Well, the kind of slow burn of this episode was really cool because like you kind of because everyone kind of has a leg to stand on. That's the interesting part about this whole thing is everybody has a leg to stand on. Like you're looking
like
at
a
Vaemond,
legitimate claim.
Vaemond's sitting there like, my brother got his throat slit. He may or may not be dying. My entire bloodline will cease to exist because Rhaenyra is like having sex with Harwin Strong. Like she's not actually producing Valerian heirs. My son or my nephew Laenor is dead, even though he's not. He's over in Essos.
Right.
But like he's like, dude, like if it doesn't go to me, my bloodline will cease to exist. This needs to be dealt with. And like so like you're like, okay, this makes perfect sense. And then Rhaenyra obviously is like, no, like this is my birthright, all this stuff, and then with the Hand of the King and Alicent, it's obvious that they want Vaemond to be in control because it just adds more power to their particular house. So it's a very classic Game of Thrones power dynamic where everything that everybody's doing kind of makes sense, but it's all kind of to pull leverage in Westeros. So everyone rides down to King's Landing, and obviously Daemon and Rhaenyra are immediately like, these MFers are just using Viserys as a puppet, and they are. They
have got all their logos around the castle.
They have their logos around the castle, which was an interesting call out from Daemon.
That would drive me crazy if I was Rhaenyra.
Well, and what it is it's classic, like very outward. It's like there's a subtlety that's missing from the High Towers. That's very in your face.
It's just in the face of Rhaenyra and Daemon.
They made it clear in the beginning of the episode too that Alicent and Otto are feeding Viserys milk of the poppy even when he doesn't ask for it as frequently as possible.
Just
to the
so
point where
sit on
Viserys
throne.
literally has to like say no and says, "I want to have a clear mind." Did you see it coming? Viserys showing up to the
No,
meeting?
did you?
You didn't? Yeah, I had a feeling about it.
I thought it was cool how that was written in too, because everything was proceeding as you'd expect it to, and then the doors open, and then what was so neat about it is that gold mask was incredible that he was wearing.
Such a cool, iconic thing.
It was super, super iconic. How many Halloween costumes of that are we going to see this year?
Seriously.
Which is actually, it'd be kind of funny to see because it's a giant coat with just Schmeagol hair.
Yes,
right. And then a Phantom of the Opera gold mask.
Yes.
But no, that was such a power move. And then you could tell that the Hightower family was completely overstepping when they all looked at each other when he showed up. And said,
yeah.
Crud.
And what an epic one-liner from Viserys when he walks by slowly around everybody, and then he finally gets up to Otto and he just looks over and he's like, "I will sit the throne today."
Right.
And it was just like a total, because like Viserys to the end, he understood what the Hightowers were doing.
And for whatever it's worth too, Viserys we've been very critical of, or somewhat critical of. We've called him a weak king, and he's finally making some power moves. What I kind of like about him though, and this is a rarity in Game of Thrones, and this spoke to me just because I'm a complete baby apparently, but my favorite scene in Game of Thrones so far was the dinner scene when everyone's happy and sitting around. I mean, that's so lame, and I know that that's just completely not what people watch Game of Thrones for. Like I totally get that, but it contrasted really nicely with what could be and what is, with the downfall of mankind and the everlasting search for power. So like in always wanting to be in charge and always searching for power, you give up those moments, right? And it was a really cool contrast to see that, and only for a short moment, because that hatred for each other has literally been bred into the children.
Yeah, it's literally been forced onto the next generation.
Yeah.
And, I'm really glad you brought up the Viserys part, because I thought the exact same thing when I was watching that episode. I was like, you know what? Because presumably what ends up happening, because Viserys leaves the dinner and things immediately go south. But he's out of the room. And then he goes back
Grandpa's
to his room
gone.
and basically dies. So essentially, Viserys' last act as king is he makes up for a lifetime of mistakes.
Right.
And at his core, his biggest problem is his optimism.
Right. Which doesn't fly in Game of Thrones.
If he really, really, like, for instance, if that exact situation had happened, but Viserys was more like Daemon in terms of his personality, his last act in life, he would have just ordered Alicent and Otto to be killed.
Right.
He would have just
You're
been
totally
like,
right.
And he would have said, and he would have gone out of his way to basically get in front of this conflict and be like, these people will all kill each other. They'll get all of our dragons killed. This is going to be a huge mistake. We have to get. But
that's a great
Viserys
point.
At his core is too much of an optimist.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so funny is his last memory, literally as a living human being, before he goes and gets high on the milk of the poppy and then dies, is his last sober memory is looking at his family apologizing to each other and being happy. And so he dies thinking everything's fine. But the truth of the matter is his optimism blinded him to the fact that these people there needed to be a preemptive strike,
right? Which is the downside or which is like the reality of Game of Thrones world, right? Like optimism makes you weak, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm an optimist, and that makes me weak. I'm being serious.
But in real life, being an optimist and being good to other people actually can get you so far in life.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
I agree.
But so like a contrast, true reality in my book. What was interesting?
So you're saying this is not actually Game of Thrones in the real world, is what you're saying?
Oh, exactly. I'm not about to kill you because I don't want to take over this podcast, Jay. You do most of the work behind the scenes, and we'll keep it that way. Now, Elena might try and kill you because then I wouldn't be able to do the podcast by myself because no one would want to listen to me.
Exactly.
No, what was I going to say? Oh, there is an example of true love in Game of Thrones as well. And it's typically not between lovers either. Like, so some could say, Daemon and Rhaenyra love each other. But I think that's, it might be somewhat of the case, but relatively superficial. But the love for a parent and their child is true love, I think, in Game of Thrones. And I think that's one of the driving forces as well.
That drives the original Game of Thrones series as well. Cersei's love for her children, Catelyn Stark's love for her children. It drives everything. It's like you said, it's the only love that's unpoisoned. And a huge part of that is because most of these marriages are purely for political reasons anyway.
Exactly, and for power. Mm-hmm.
Fun fact I learned when I was researching the other day. Did you know that George R.R. Martin wrote the Dance of Dragons into his universe of Game of Thrones based on a real-life conflict in England over a conflict of secession?
Wow.
And very similarly, England was in a massive civil war that was incredibly costly.
Is that how they got rid of their dragons?
And obviously there were dragons in Great Britain at the time, or in England at the time. But yeah, so I thought that was really interesting, like this specific concept of a interfamily conflict bred over who should become king when someone dies that led to a very costly civil war is a literal thing that happened.
That's crazy.
And I thought that was a cool dynamic at play there.
Yeah.
So things immediately go south over the kids.
Yep.
Aegon goes over and basically says to Jaehaerys's wife. I could be wrong about that, but something along the lines of like, oh, you should have sex with me. I'd teach you stuff he can't teach. Stuff
I
like
know.
That.
It's like, dude, chill out.
And then literally, Aemond stands up and goes out of his way to basically take veiled shots, calling the kids bastards, and then things immediately go south from there. Although presumably what really ends up sending everything south is Alicent. But definitely there was some more bad blood that was bred there. And that was so funny when he drew his sword and then Daemon just kind of calmly walks between the two.
Oh, so cool.
Do not make this mistake. Foreshadowing there too, I won't reveal it, but there is a massive, massive fight in the future between Aemond and Daemon, which will be very, very good.
That will be really cool. Daemon has a little bit of a soft side. And we see that happen multiple times, but it continues to happen. For example, when he's, I forget what land it is, when he's just on vacation.
He's over in Essos.
Yeah, he's over in Essos, and
I believe in Bravos in particular.
And he's kind of liking that lifestyle. And then I do think that him helping the king with his crown when it falls, I think that was genuine to some degree, right? He wanted him to be there in order to rule in his favor, of course, but there was some portrayal of Daemon almost feeling sorry for the king and his situation. Like Daemon has literally just a touch of what is like a little bit of a soft side,
Absolutely.
A little bit of a fatherly figure.
Absolutely. I thought him showing up for Viserys as he was climbing the steps was a really cool Game of Thrones moment.
Yeah.
A lot of like full circle stuff with Viserys. A lot of loose ends get tied off right before they get immediately untied. But at least I feel like Viserys dies mentally in peace, which I think is good for him, even though things immediately go to hell in a handbasket.
Right.
Oh,
right.
Gosh. Is that all you got for this episode?
That's all I got.
All right, everybody. As always, we sincerely appreciate your support, and we will see you next time.
Thanks a lot.